I did environmental work. Most of my work was kind of a hybrid between environment, public health, and business development. I worked on developing a cook stove venture. So in Malawi, where I served, biomass energy was by far the most dominant form of energy. About 97% of Malawi's energy portfolio, all extracted from their forests. They had the highest rate of deforestation in southern Africa. Pneumonia, which is the product of burning firewood, that was the second leading killer in Malawi after HIV. And so there were a number of impetuses for getting involved in this topic. So I worked with local entrepreneurs as well as an Irish carbon trading company, basically to bring enhanced high-efficiency stove technology to a rural area and disseminate it and enhance both access and adoption levels in a rural part of Malawi through some local entrepreneurs. I later on went to work with the U.S. Embassy in Malawi to advance some of their initiatives where they were pushing the government of Malawi to put greater priority on the impacts of cooking practices for its energy security and public health components. So we were working with the Irish mission as well as the American mission in tandem to eventually what we did was secure the government of Malawi's membership in an international partnership called the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. And so for me that was a lot of career development. I came from an environmental background, but really it became a lot of business development, managing all aspects of a project. And so for me, what I always tell people as a Peace Corps recruiter is that Peace Corps is really a unique opportunity, whether it's coming out of an undergraduate program or really coming out of anywhere in life. You're never going to receive the same degree of responsibility in the United States as you would in Peace Corps. In Peace Corps, you are managing the entirety of a project. It might be a very small project, and it might be subject to a lot of failures, but those are challenges to be overcome. But what you do is you have the responsibility of designing projects all the way from implementation to financing to accounting to building teams around that, scaling up, and going beyond. And so from a career standpoint, I think that offers a lot. Also, coming back from Peace Corps from a career standpoint, there are a lot of opportunities for returned Peace Corps volunteers. Peace Corps gives you non-competitive eligibility, which is a foot into the door of the federal government. So basically, if you're applying for a federal position and someone else is applying, you're equally qualified, you are given that position. So you have non-competitive eligibility for a year after your Peace Corps service, and that's deferred if you pursue grad school right after. And so there's a lot of opportunities from that standpoint. And Peace Corps is also a very well-known and very well-respected international development organization that has strong connections to other U.S. organizations and other global organizations. And so there's a great community of returned Peace Corps volunteers that you find in embassies abroad, businesses in the United States, all over universities like U of M. And so there's a lot of opportunities, and our panelists are going to talk a lot about them, both domestic opportunities, international opportunities, the whole gamut of them. So we're going to hear about their own experiences and everything else like that. For me, it led into my graduate work at U of M. I'm a student in natural resources and urban planning. It also led into some work with a large utility company where I worked on energy efficiency programs there, kind of building off of energy efficiency work in Malawi. And then I also worked on energy issues with the State Department as well over my past 2 summers back. And so it's been a good way of kind of spinning my work in Peace Corps into bigger work since then, hopefully working on career development from there. But with that, welcome everyone, and again, please feel free to ask any questions. We're going to start by introducing Kim Coyne. Kim Coyne works now with the Office of the Provost at the University of Michigan. She was a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay, and then she also worked for the Peace Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C., and she's done a lot of work on international health and safety and risk management as it relates to travel abroad and working abroad. And she's going to talk a little bit about her story.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim. As Brian said, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Paraguay. I followed a slightly different path. I graduated college and then I got a job instead of going right into Peace Corps. So I'm excited that you guys are thinking about this at this point, but don't think that you have to do it right away. You can do it at various times. I graduated and then I got a job right away, and I found myself a few years later working 2 jobs so I could save money to travel to places like Central and South America. And I'd spend 2 or 3 weeks traveling around there, and I'd love it, and I'd come back and I'd be really frustrated with life back in the US, and I'd want to be there instead of here. And the one New Year's resolution I've made that I actually kept was in 1994, way back. And that was to find a way to live overseas and experience another culture and learn another language. And I didn't really know how that was. I didn't, I thought Peace Corps, teaching English, who knows? I explored a lot of different things. I talked with a lot of returned Peace Corps volunteers. I met with I'm from the Chicago area, so I met with the Chicago recruiting office, and then I was like, that sounds like the right thing to do. And of course, that was what my mother had told me to do too. But you don't always do what your mom tells you to do right away. So I applied, everything went super smooth. Once I had made that decision for myself, the whole process was really smooth. And it is a long process, as you have probably heard, with a lot of work and everything, but it went pretty smoothly and everything. So I started in May of 1995, that's when I left, and did my orientation, the staging event as it's called, in Miami, and then flew with a group of 33 other eager, excited people to Paraguay, South America. I worked with a cooperative I should say. It was a very rural location. I was about 50 kilometers off a dirt road, about 6 to 7 hours from the capital. It was a really nice community. Paraguay has 2 national languages. They speak both Spanish and Guarani, and I had never heard of Guarani, of course, before. So I learned a little bit of Guarani. I had taken Spanish in college, which was lucky. And so it was a great way to integrate into a community, to have a nice long experience. I was really glad I had done some travel before that. And it doesn't matter where you're traveling, as long as you have that chance to get out and see that there are other cultures there, have an experience with other languages. Some of the things that might have shocked me were not quite so bad. I had electricity, but I didn't have running water. So in a way, it was kind of like a 2-year camping experience of bucket bathing, doing your dishes and your laundry in a bucket of water and everything. But it was actually not as bad as you think it might be. The cooperative was really good. It was an agricultural cooperative, and so I worked with them. I worked mainly teaching computer skills because back in 1995, computers were not as common. They were getting a computer when I started there, and so once they got the computer, I taught them WordPerfect, which is like ancient history right now, because Microsoft Word just wasn't around. But I taught them how to use WordPerfect in Spanish, so I learned how to use a lot of the computer programs in Spanish. And then through my work with that, I connected with the municipality, and I taught a lot of their staff how to use computers too, because that was the only other place in our community that had a computer. And so just basic stuff like maintaining your computer and some of the software programs I taught. I did some instruction manuals for them so that they knew how to work things, because oftentimes they would say, here, Kim, type this up. You know how to type faster than we do. And I would say, that may be true, but you need to learn how to use the system. So why don't you sit here and I'll help you so you learn what to do. And it was a really great community. I had a really nice host family that I had stayed with when I first got there. They helped me find a home to live in. I connected with a lot of the people in the community. It was very warm and welcoming, and that was very exciting and kind of unexpected. I just wasn't aware that how welcoming the people would be, and so that was really nice. I served from 1995 to 1999, so that was 4 years. I somehow missed that it was a 2-year service. I extended my service to work with the pilot project in municipal service development. And that was a really cool opportunity. I was interested in staying in Paraguay. I thought I would stay and work on projects that I had going in the community I was in. I talked with my supervisor there, and he said, we're thinking of putting another volunteer in your site after you, but if you're really interested in staying, we've been thinking about doing this project with the municipalities, and we're not really sure what to do about it. We just know the government has talked with us. They're interested in finding ways to unite the government with the people more. Paraguay had been under a dictatorship for 35 years, so there was a lot of mistrust between the people and the government, and for very good reason. And they really wanted to find a way to kind of bend those ties and everything. That was it. He said, I don't really have anything to tell you more than that. I can give you the names of people in the government. I can give you some NGOs. If you're interested, if you don't mind, just kind of seeing what's out there, you can do it. And I kind of thought about it, and I thought, when else am I going to have an opportunity to do something like this? And it was both scary and exciting at the same time, because it's like, well, I don't know what to do. But I thought, hey, this is an opportunity here, and I have 2 years of experience in the country. I've got the language down. I've got the culture down. I've got a few names on a piece of paper that I can call. So sure, why not? So I did. Peace Corps is really good. If you extend your service for a full year, And there are various ways to do it, although it is not super common. There are ways to do it. But they will actually give you a month home leave. And so they sent me home for a month, so I was able to see my family and friends, which was really nice, because I hadn't gone home in those 2 years. I stayed in country, or I took vacation in the area, I should say. I traveled regionally. But it was nice to go home, and then I went back and I served for another year. That was going well, and it was finally, we realized we could make this a project. And so I talked with my boss, and he said, well, why don't you just stay longer, and we can, keep working on the project. And I said, okay. So I had to make that second phone call back home to say, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm going to be here a little longer again. And again, this is all on phones that are, in the capital city, not like out of my home, and not on cell phones, because we didn't have cell phones at that time. So a lot of differences that you guys, if you're thinking of going in, would experience some more communication methods today than earlier serving volunteers. Just to kind of bring that to a close, the Municipal Development Project became an actual project for volunteers, which was great. I finished in March of 1999, went home for a month, and then I went back to Paraguay, and I worked as a technical trainer this time for the first group of volunteers serving on the municipal project. So it was a really nice way to see it from the very beginning to completion, and actually having volunteers and to work with the group of 7 trainees on the project. So that's the kind of experience that I don't know that I would have had in the United States. And to be able to go overseas, to learn the culture, to learn the language, to really integrate, and it's my second home. I mean, it's like, it's in my heart. I wouldn't trade that for anything. And it's a professional development experience I just never would have imagined beforehand. Came back to the U.S. and I found a job. I was lucky I found a job within 3 weeks of returning home, which is pretty cool. I found a Peace Corps publishes a newsletter called The Hotline that had job postings in it. And I grabbed the hotline, went to the airport, sat at the airport, and I was like, oh, this job looks cool. And it's right by my hometown. And I got home, sent an application in, and everything fell together. So I did get lucky on that one. I worked for a study abroad organization, actually. It was a small nonprofit organization close to my hometown. And I was there for a couple of years working on outbound programs. And I just really loved the idea of helping open up the minds of other people, especially students, to see that there is a whole other world out there, and people do live in different ways than we do in the United States. And just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong, and we can learn from one another. I went to graduate school then. So like I've had a different path. I followed the non-traditional path, which is totally cool. But I went to graduate school about 11, 12 years after I finished college. At School for International Training in Vermont. And then I worked for a place called Earthwatch Institute, which is a nonprofit organization. They do scientific field research projects. So again, still kind of with the international realm. I worked with supporting group programs, so for teachers or for university professors that wanted to take groups of students into the field, work with scientists, go study leatherback sea turtles in Trinidad, or go on an archaeological dig. Meerkats in South Africa, I mean, really cool projects. And again, it was still along that theme of opening up people's minds to a world out there that there's a lot more available. And then after that, I went to Peace Corps headquarters, and I was in the Inter-American Pacific region. I worked there 5 years. I started out on what was called the Central America, or the South America Desk Unit, and then I moved to Central America. And then I became a regional security advisor for the Inter-American Pacific region. During my time with Peace Corps, I dealt with all sorts of fun stuff like earthquakes. We had a really bad earthquake in Peru where we had to check in with volunteers. We had, there was a political crisis between Bolivia and the U.S. government, and we evacuated volunteers from Bolivia, and we had 113 volunteers, and so I was part of the evacuation team on that. And we moved everybody to Peru, and then worked with the volunteers on a transition process. It's not common that volunteers are evacuated, but when there are situations in countries when there a lot of instability and Peace Corps has concerns that they can't really take care of the safety of volunteers, they're very proactive with reaching out and making sure that, A, are you okay where you're at? And if you're not, and overall, if there are issues, they'll move to that point where they move volunteers out of the country. So not common, but they really do look out for your well-being. And so it was a really interesting position to work with, really exciting, and got to learn a lot about more areas beyond what I had of my Central America, Latin America focus. And then with that position, I was 5 years in DC, and I knew going into DC I'm not a city person. I I love DC, it's a great place to visit, but I just couldn't handle the lifestyle over time. And so I needed to find something that was, you know, along my interests and everything, but not in a really, not that it's that big of a city, but it's still a big city. So I found this position here at the University of Michigan, which is working with international health and safety. And, you know, everything worked out, so I'm now here. One thing I do want to mention, you know, as you think about your career paths and what you're studying now, where you are now and what you choose to major in and everything may not be what you work in for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so really keep that in mind. Some people are really focused, they're going down this path and they do follow that path for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Other people take a path like I do, which is kind of a meandering away certain lines, I guess. The position I'm in right now is really a new field. It's an emerging field where colleges and universities are doing, are taking much more proactive steps to look after the health and safety of their students, faculty, and staff. This didn't exist when I was in college. It didn't exist even, you know, 15 years ago. And so keep your mind open as you look at careers and see how you can use the skills that you gained to adapt to new career paths, and keep your mind open to the fact that there are a lot of opportunities and positions out there that will probably be out there in 20 years from now that just simply don't exist today. So, you know, for me it worked out well of just being open and seeing, you know, seeing different opportunities and paths to follow. I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'll just continue talking. So please.
It's fun talking about it.
It is fun talking about it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, so next I'll introduce Hans Sowder. And so Hans works with the College of Engineering in their Center for Engineering Diversity and Outreach. He was an RPCV in Cameroon and is going to talk a little bit about his experiences there and his work in kind of higher education, diversity sorts of work in the United States now with U of M.
So, evening everyone. I left Cameroon in 1992, so 21 years ago, and it still influences my life today by having taught me perseverance, self-confidence to persevere, and it also has given me great stamina in different projects that I've endeavored to try to do. And there's really nothing that if I put my mind to it, that I've really given up on since then. And I attribute a lot of that to Peace Corps. I went to Vanderbilt University and was majoring in molecular biology and psychology, and my dream was to study the brain. And when I had my bachelor's degree in both those fields, I realized there really wasn't much I could do with those except go to grad school, and I was tired of school. So I could have strapped on a tie and sold pharmaceuticals, but that didn't sound appealing, and I saw a commercial that had a guy out in some rice paddies, and it said, "The toughest job you ever loved." And I said, "That's me. Let me get out of here and check something else out." And so I applied to the Peace Corps. It's about at that time it was about 8 to 9 months application process. Went through all that, and during my, I graduated late '88 from Vanderbilt. Went a fifth year to finish up my my 2 majors, and got the letter and was off in June of 1989 to Cameroon, which is in West Africa. It's a wonderful country. It's got 8 provinces. 8 of them are Francophone, French-speaking, and 2 of them are English-speaking. It's bordered by Nigeria and Chad and the Congo and Equatorial Guinea and the Central African Republic. And I went there as a teacher. So they liked my my science major and said, "Hey, we can make you a science teacher." And so I went over there and did 3 months of training to become a science teacher, learned how to teach in that 3 months, learned cross-cultural skills, and learned how to take care of myself out in the bush. And got posted to a little town, little village called Njikwa that had no running water, no electricity, so I collected rainwater during the rain season and paid a kid to carry me some water from a spring about a mile away during the dry season, bathed in a stream, and just came to really enjoy the sun. When the sun went down, I went to bed, and when the sun got up, with the help of the roosters, I got out of bed and walked about a half mile up to the school. 70 kids per classroom. They all stood up when he walked in. We're all wearing uniforms. All said, "Good morning, sir." I was the only expatriate there in the school. It was a secondary school, so it had roughly 7th grade through 12th grade, and taught chemistry and biology, and pretty much was a lecturer. Everything was up front. There were there was 2 microscopes in the school, and the school had over 1,000 kids. Took the kids out and showed them the trees and stuff like that in the biology class, and we tried to mix a couple things together, but with 70 kids it's kind of hard, and there's no aides or anything like that. And so I was there for 2 years and really became part of the community, forgot I was white pretty much, and saw that a lot of the kids were getting in some trouble. The one soccer field, and everybody loved soccer, was always being used by us, by the teachers after school. We'd play soccer a lot, and so the kids went off and they would drink palm wine, and not all of them, but I mean this is something you saw quite a bit. They would go off and they would drink some palm wine, and they would start messing around with each other, and there was some early pregnancy stuff. And so my secondary project, I got some money from USAID to build a basketball court. They had never seen basketball before. They were really curious as to what I was building out of cement and what are these poles going up, and so I was able to, over about I extended for a third year, was offered an extension for a third year to finish the basketball court, and was able to teach them basketball and take the team and visit a couple other schools, and that was really a neat experience. And that was an example of a project that saw a lot of obstacles, people stealing cement, and the workers mixing way too much sand with the cement and it washing away with the first rains, and but coming back and trying to just make it good. I don't know if it's still there. I don't want to know actually, but after 3 years, came back to the States and was kind of interested in wildlife biology. I had seen some work that the WWF was doing over there and some work that USAID was doing along the lines of conservation, and explored different options, and had an opportunity to go into wildlife biology at the University of Georgia studying domesticated deer, which was okay, but I'd rather study chimpanzees. But got a position at U of M here at the Peace Corps Fellows Program that was existing at that time to get a master's in secondary science education, and I also had an opportunity to go to Northern Arizona and get a master's in secondary science education at their Peace Corps Fellows Program. And that one you would have taught in a Native American village, and here at U of M you would have taught in Detroit, in inner city Detroit, math and science being critical shortage areas. So I decided to, I said, well, I can still, become a wildlife biologist and study chimps one day out in the wild like Jane Goodall. But 2 years in Michigan is not going to be a bad thing if I have that little Michigan diploma there. So I came to Michigan and taught full-time in Detroit at Kettering High School on the east side of Detroit, and took classes at night and in the summer, and got my certification after the first year, got my master's after the second year, and there was a cohort of about 15 of us, people from all over, RPCVs from all over the world, and including my future wife, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Central African Republic, which is right next door to Cameroon. We didn't meet over there. I always imagine if God was looking down and seeing little lights on heads, he'd see ours come really close, and he'd look at me and say, no, you're not mature enough yet. Separate us and have us meet in Ann Arbor. She's from Philly, I'm from Atlanta. And so we got married immediately after grad school. She was a teacher as well, and we moved up to Alaska, lived in a little Indian village, an Athabascan Indian village, a little fly-in village. We just had wanderlust still, and so we didn't have any kids and no obligations, and no debt because the master's was paid for, which was kind of nice. She ended up becoming pregnant with our first child up there, and so we wanted to get away from a fly-in village, which can be a little foreboding at times during storms and stuff. And so we tried to find a job on the road system up there, but those are very coveted jobs, and so I wasn't able to find that. So came back down and got my same job at Kettering High School in Detroit, and I stayed there for another 4 years, so making 6 years total. Loved it. Really became I guess I call myself a student of people of African ancestry. It's something that I've always been fascinated with. It was one of the reasons that I checked the last box on the application. I said, where do you want to go in the world? I said, I want to go to Central Africa and learn about those cultures. And so I did that, and then going to Detroit was a totally different gig. And so backing up, when I was in Detroit my first year, and I'm used to having 70 kids per class and them all standing up when I walk in, and them showing a lot of courtesy and respect, because that's what it is. I mean, teachers are highly revered in Cameroon, And I got, they picked me up, chewed me up, and spit me out on a regular basis because I tried to lecture and I tried to be very authoritative. But again, the Peace Corps stamina came through, and despite many tears on the way home on the hour drive back to Ann Arbor, I was able to finally, after I think it was December, there was another teacher there that kind of became my mentor, and he introduced me to a project, and he said, "Why don't you try this? Instead of standing up front, have them do this, and then you can walk amongst them and you can talk to them. It's just a totally different dynamic." So it was at that point that I became a project-based teacher, and just enjoyed walking amongst the kids and kind of seeing them instead of an up-front person like I was in Cameroon for 3 years, and for the first few months in Detroit, working with them and learning more about what it means to create situations where they can inquire and discover and use the lab equipment that we had. We had more lab equipment in Detroit than in Africa, but not a lot, but we had some, and so I was able to develop some projects around that, and all that. I got to give credit back to Peace Corps for just kind of giving me an opportunity to just develop that type of perseverance. And so I was there for another 4 years, and in the year 2000 I was named Metro Detroit Science Teacher of the Year, and took that and a desire to kind of settle somewhere. My wife and I, we finally said, you know, Michigan's a place we want to live, but when we moved back down from Alaska, we lived in St. Clair Shores, which is on the east side of the state. If anybody knows that. And that was a whole culture right there too, learning how to work on Fords and drink Budweiser. But not that all St. Clair Shores is doing that, but it was an interesting experience nonetheless. But we decided we wanted to live somewhere else, and so my wife found a house here in Ann Arbor, and by then we had 3 kids, and so we moved to Ann Arbor, and I did the commute back to Detroit, and I finally was able, with that little award I got, I was able to get a job in Ypsilanti. And I taught in Ypsilanti for 12 years up to 2012, at which point I left teaching because some things were getting a little shaky there in the district as it consolidated with Willow Run, and started putting some irons in the fire in different places. Considered teaching. I was offered a job in Plymouth, Kent, and I was one of the 2 finalists at Community High School in Ann Arbor. I was offered a job in Lima, Peru, at the international school there, but they would only pay for 2 scholarships for the kids. And I have 4 kids now, so and that's all. That's another African thing about me. I have a big family. So the Lima thing didn't work out because they were only able to give a scholarship to the international school for 2 of the kids, not all 4, and it's $10,000 tuition, and they were offering me $40,000, which would have been enough living there. But nonetheless, we decided to look somewhere else, and so a job opened up here at the College of Engineering in the Center for Engineering Diversity and Outreach, developing K-12 programming. And so that's what I do now. I develop programs to excite kids and students and teachers about STEM, and specifically about engineering. As an example, there was a bunch of teachers from Detroit that came in on Saturday, and I did a workshop with them to teach them some activities that they could run with their students to teach them what it means to engage in an engineering design activity. And tomorrow, my heart is still in Ipsy in a large measure, and we have all the females from the 9th through 12th grade in the STEM Academy over there that are coming over, about 80 of them. And they're going to come over. I'm going to do a STEM activity with them in the morning, and then they'll do a tour of North Campus, and then I've recruited a bunch of female engineering and other science female students to serve on a panel, and so they're going to just do a little give and take tomorrow. So that's kind of the stuff I do. I work with teachers and students, and this has just all been the result of taking that step there, because I never knew. I wanted to study the brain. I just didn't know that the plan was that I'd be working with some different brains, that is teenagers, and so I can see how my passion in college just kind of shaped itself in a way that I could have never foreseen, and it was the opportunity the Peace Corps afforded. And it's you know, 21 years later, it still is incredibly formative in who I am, and I just give that experience a lot of credit for giving me the perseverance, as I said, that I have. And 2010, when I left, I left Ypsilanti High School and started a new school with 6 other teachers in Ypsilanti called Ypsilanti New Tech. But once again, I'm going to give Peace Corps some credit. I was named Michigan High School Science Teacher of the Year in 2010. And again, it's through just having this perseverance, this stamina that came from being a Peace Corps volunteer. It started there. I'm sure there's more in there. I'm going to give my mom some credit too. But, so that's kind of my story up to now.
Thanks, Hans. That's excellent. And next, we're going to turn to a current student, Jeff Burmeister, and he's going to talk a little bit about his Peace Corps work in Senegal. He's currently a student in the School of Natural Resources and Environment, working a lot on domestic environmental policy.
So, yeah, like Brian said, my name's Jeff. I'm from Holland, Michigan originally. It's on the west side of the state. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the state geography. Got a few Holland fans out there. And I think just kind of the broad message about my life trajectory and career path is, you know, in first grade you have like the careers, like what do you want to be when you grow up? And everybody says, I want to be like a basketball player or a football player or like a music star. And then there's that one dweeb that goes up and says, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. And then, you know, they like that kid ends up doing it. They just have a beeline like straight to that career path. I was not that kid. So my life trajectory looks a little bit more like a sailboat in the wind, kind of tacking this way and that, but ultimately going towards, you know, a straight line. So as I was graduating from high school, I got involved with a program that was run by my biology teacher, who was actually a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon in the late 80s and early 90s. And he was in the Northwest Province where you were stationed. So did you happen to know
That's why you knew about Blenda?
Yeah, that is, yeah.
Okay.
So did you happen to know Mike Yeager?
You got to be kidding me. I went to grad school with him. I served with him. He was there for 2 years, for my first 2 years, yeah.
And he was also a teacher in Detroit after he finished Peace Corps.
I taught him everything he knows. No, yeah. No, I know Mike well.
So, well, Mike is doing some great things.
Hoot.
So Mike is doing some great things.
Gracious.
One thing you'll find if you ever do join Peace Corps is that
You've got to tell him to email me, because I've been emailing him.
he doesn't respond in like all caps. That's usually his MO.
Okay.
No, he's a great guy. One of the most influential teachers I've ever had.
That's great.
And one thing you'll find if you ever join Peace Corps is that, like, are you familiar with the concept of Bacon points? That Kevin Bacon is like 3 connections away from every movie star ever. Well, that's kind of the way it is in Peace Corps. That you're like 2 connections away from everybody in the community. So Mr. Yeager had organized a program for students to travel to Cameroon and set up computer labs in secondary schools, and also to visit Peace Corps volunteers who were working on mostly agroforestry projects a little bit further afield. So I had the opportunity to go on that program as I graduated from high school. And it's funny how impressionable you are at 18 years old. I mean, this was a 3-week trip over to Cameroon. You know, in hindsight, not really that long of a time to make a decision, but I fell in love with sort of West Central Africa immediately. And it really ended up being one of the most defining experiences of my life. I ended up going to Tulane University in New Orleans, and I studied international development and political science. And the international development major was added on immediately after I went to Cameroon. I said, like, this is where I really want to focus a lot of my studies on. I switched my language to French, knowing that I wanted to pursue something in West Africa. So I went through school at Tulane. I got the chance to study abroad in Ghana during my junior year, just for 1 semester. But that kind of further made me fall in love with working in West Africa. I got the chance to do a brief internship at what was called the Legal Resources Center, which did a lot of legal rights advocacy, particularly for ethnic minority groups in the capital city. So that was a really interesting educational experience. And I also got the chance, when I came home, to work as an intern on Capitol Hill, like every good political science student should. And that was a really rewarding experience in a lot of ways. I learned that I found the legislative process really fascinating. I really enjoyed being able to do research and learn more about these really substantive policy issues. And this was back when Congress talked about substantive policy issues. But I also found that, like, getting to know some congressional staffers, I found that loyalty was an inch deep. and passion was an inch deep. And it was something that really initially turned me off to working in that environment in Washington, D.C. So I said, I'm really interested in policy, I'm really interested in sort of this international development realm, but I'm not necessarily interested in this particular work environment. During my senior year of college, I worked as a legal assistant at a small law firm in New Orleans. They did, among a lot of other legal areas, they did a lot of work with Hurricane Katrina victims, people who had lost their homes or their homes were severely damaged, trying to help them work with insurance companies to get fair settlements on their insurance policies. So that kind of further added to my, the social justice component of what I wanted to pursue. Decided at that point that I did not want to go to law school. So each of these experiences kind of gave me like something that I really enjoyed and something that kind of turned me a direction away from that. And so as I was graduating, I looked into Peace Corps, and having had that exposure to visiting Peace Corps volunteers in Cameroon and being able to study abroad in Ghana, and went through the application process. The application process was relatively smooth. And I ended up being assigned to Senegal, which is a Francophone country in West Africa, but levels of French literacy are relatively low, maybe around 35 to 40%, because French is nobody's first language. It was the colonial language and the language of administration and education, but if you don't end up going to school, or if you go to school for a very short period of time, you generally don't learn French. So our language training when I got there was in local languages based on the predominant ethnic group in your area. So I got the chance to learn a completely different language called Pular. It's spoken by the Pular or Fula people who kind of stretch. They're a minority group in every country where they exist, but they really have a wide geographic span. They were traditionally nomadic herders, so they're in a lot of West and Central African countries. When I was in Peace Corps, I was in the Environmental and Preventive Health Education Program, which sounds a little vague and a little bit nebulous on what you're supposed to do, and it turns out it is. There's a lot of sort of self-motivation and figuring out what projects you're going to work on once you get to your site. Unlike Hans, where sounds like you had a more specific work assignment, some Peace Corps areas have a little bit more open-ended project assignment, where you might have some informal community counterparts, but ultimately it's up to you to make connections and figure out what projects you're going to work on. So I approached it, I did sort of a smorgasbord of different projects. My primary area actually ended up being preventive health education. I organized a lot of education sessions at local health posts or at schools related to malaria prevention, related to proper nutrition using locally available food and readily accessible food. I did work, I organized a series of family planning discussions with men in local communities. I found that a lot of family planning efforts in Senegal had been targeted towards women specifically at health posts. And I thought that it was really discounting a big segment of the population in this conversation, and a segment of the population that still, in terms of the social realities of family dynamics, had a lot of control over women's decisions. So I said, I think men have to be a part of this conversation, and so I worked with local health workers to organize a series of discussions around family planning. The most fun project I worked on was starting a bi-weekly radio show at a local radio station in local language. So I'm sure I made a ton of mistakes in Pular on the air that was broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people, but I loved the experience. I got to do a lot of interviews with community leaders, with health workers, with people who had started kind of interesting small enterprises in the area. And that show is still going on today, which I'm really happy to say. It's run by volunteers who ended up succeeding me. And I also worked as what's called a work zone coordinator for the volunteers in our area. So what we were tasked with was figuring out the strategy for future site selection in our area, like where you would place Peace Corps volunteers for several years out in the future. And also with coming up with an annual regional action plan, determining ways that volunteers in the area could collaborate with each other on common program areas. So so you'll notice that in that list of project areas that there was not a lot of specifically environmental projects. And it turns out I really did not do a lot, even though it was a big part of my program area. And the reason that I didn't, when the few that I did ended up being, I'll just be honest, they were abject failures. And the reason I didn't was because when I arrived at site, you were really encouraged to do like a baseline survey in your community. Go to different households, interview people on what they feel like the biggest problems in their community are, the biggest needs areas. And not one person mentioned an issue that was specifically environmental. For most people in my community, I lived in a small, like rural road town of about 8,000 or 9,000 people. Most of the households I interviewed said health issues and money and jobs were the biggest problems for them. So I decided to focus my service a lot more on the preventive health area. But I looked at my experience and said, I mean, obviously environmental issues are having an impact on people in my community. It's just that this impact is a lot more long-term when they're faced with so many more, acute concerns related to specific health topics and specific economic concerns. But thinking on it, I said, well, environmental issues really end up, touching each one of those areas. And I want to focus on and I want to focus my graduate education on finding ways for environmental policy to become more salient and to become more interdisciplinary and holistic and to relate to areas that are of both short-term and long-term interest for people across the globe. So I came back to the United States and I found SNRE, and I was really, which is the School of Natural Resources and Environment, and I was really excited about their interdisciplinary approach and about specifically their practical master's project where you work with a team of students to do a project with a real-world client. And I'm actually focusing a little bit more domestically at this point, at least in the short term, but I'm interested in energy policy, specifically promoting energy efficiency in low-income communities here in Southeast Michigan. So, as you can see, my life trajectory, kind of went this way, but what Peace Corps really did was it allowed me to solidify and figure out what my passion truly was. And I knew I was interested in policy and some sort of social justice component, but it really allowed me to see that, wow, these environmental issues that really touch a lot of different areas are big issues, but I'm not sure that current policies are really getting the job done. So I want to work to try to improve outcomes for folks in terms of environmental and other issues. Yeah, so that's my story.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, and then lastly, we're going to turn to Katie Collins, who is a student at the Ford School of Public Policy. She is an RPCV. She served in Ukraine, teaching English as a foreign language.
Hi everyone. Like you said, my name's Katie, and I'm also a Peace Corps recruiter here on campus. So if you ever have any questions for us, we're more than happy to answer them for you. So kind of what Jeff said, in terms of if someone asked me what I wanted to do in high school or even before that, it's not even like I had an answer. I simply didn't know. I feel like most people had a subject that they really liked, or maybe wanted to be a fireman or wanted to be a doctor or something. I could never answer that question. Like, I liked all the subjects, and I didn't really like one so much that I wanted to kind of base my career off that. So I was kind of panicking a bit in high school because I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone has an idea of what they want to do, and I literally don't know. I knew some things I didn't want to do. Can't really handle blood, couldn't be a nurse, couldn't be a doctor. Maybe thought about law school, but I had no real direction. And so I went to Eastern Michigan University, and I'm originally from Brighton, so kind of close to here if anyone's familiar with that. So at EMU, again, I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I thought, well, like maybe I should pick a job that will at least pay me well when I graduate. Just like not the best way to choose a major. So I chose accounting. So I was like, well, numbers are cool, I'll like stick with that. And I did that for a year, and it's not like I hated my accounting classes or anything like that. They were kind of interesting, but I was like, I cannot do this as a career. Like, bad reason to choose something, I would say. So general advice, pick a major that you're actually interested in, and if you don't have an interest, choose a lot of different classes and try to find that, because I kind of arbitrarily chose accounting because I thought it would make me money, and then I quickly realized that was not for me. So I was majorless and had no idea what I wanted to do, which was typical for me. So in high school, I had studied German, and I kind of really liked studying languages, and so kind of my sophomore year, I was like, okay, cool, I'll take some German classes. And then I looked at all the lists of available classes, and political science, they seem to have a lot of really interesting international sorts of things. And so all the classes that I looked at that I kind of liked had some sort of international focus. So I was like, interesting. But even so, then I declared a biology major for kind of no reason. I was like, oh, well, science is cool. So it's a biology major for about a semester, but still, again, taking some poli-sci classes as well. And then I was like, what am I doing with my life? And lo and behold, Eastern created an international affairs program while I was there, and I'd already kind of taken a lot of classes because it's a very interdisciplinary program. I'd already completed a lot of the requirements. So I was like, I like German, I've taken a lot of poli-sci classes, and all these other classes that I've taken that are seemingly unrelated kind of fit into this major. So it's like, I'm gonna go for it. So once I made that decision, I really committed to it. It's like, if I'm gonna be an international affairs major, I need to actually do international sorts of things as an undergrad, otherwise what's the point? I may as well still be an accounting major. So I honestly didn't really know what was out there in terms of opportunities or what I could do after graduation. So honestly, through a Google search, I found out about the Foreign Service. And so I'd never really heard of that before. I mean, I had vaguely heard of the State Department, but I didn't really know what a diplomat really did or where they came from or what the Foreign Service was. And I was kind of looking for a cool internship opportunity that would put me in the field of international affairs, whatever that may be. So through that Google search, I was like, okay, this seems like a cool internship and this is what I want to do. And at that time, I was a sophomore, and I was like, you know what, I don't think I'm so competitive for this just yet. What can I do to sort of strengthen my application? And then what are my own interests? So then I pursued this German summer school program in Oregon. So that was like kind of my first step, like German summer school, that'll be great. And then the following year, my junior year, I applied for an internship with the State Department. And I applied, you kind of have some choice in where you go, and so you can choose 2 bureaus, and so I chose Europe, and I said specifically I'd like a German-speaking country. Obviously, I studied some German. And I was very shocked to get the email that said I was accepted into that program, and so the fall of my senior year, I went overseas and served in Germany. So before that, I was like, okay, graduation is coming up pretty soon. What do I really want to do? And kind of all growing up, I'd done volunteer work. My mom was really big on that, so even if I didn't necessarily want to be volunteering, she would drag me to things and kind of make me do it. So by the time I got to high school, I feel like I actually enjoyed doing it myself. And so I looked into Peace Corps. Honestly, my sister, I think maybe when I was in middle school, she brought home a poster that someone in high school gave her, like, hey, join the Peace Corps. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it, not you. And just a little sibling rivalry there, but all in good fun. And so Peace Corps was kind of always in the back of my mind. And so finally, when I was this international affairs major, I was going to intern for the State Department, but what was I going to do after graduation? Still didn't really have a clue. And then I was pretty committed to volunteer work. I didn't have a lot of focused volunteer experiences, and so I ended up doing some ESL tutoring here in Ann Arbor and applied for the Peace Corps, and actually did my Peace Corps interview while I was interning for the State Department in Germany. So just FYI, if you are overseas or you're not in the area, phone interviews are totally cool. I actually didn't meet anyone specifically from Peace Corps until I actually started my Peace Corps service, so that was kind of crazy. But so yeah, I feel like I chose Peace Corps because, again, I knew that I wanted an international career, and I wasn't quite exactly sure what that was going to be, but I definitely liked volunteering, and I really liked foreign languages. And it seemed like a good way to spend my time after graduation. I kind of knew I wanted grad school, but I really had no idea what I wanted to study, and I didn't want to force myself into a program that I wasn't totally committed to. So again, interned for the State Department, came back for a semester, graduated, and then I served overseas in Ukraine from 2010 to 2012. So graduated, high school in 2006, college in 2010, and then left for the Peace Corps. So I've been back now, I think, almost a year. But in terms of what I did in Peace Corps, so like I said, I acquired those ESL tutoring experience hours and whatnot, so I was kind of the only job I was really qualified for within Peace Corps was to be an English teacher. So throughout my nomination process, I wasn't really sure where I was going to go, and then I finally got the letter and they said Eastern Europe, and I was like, wait, what? Like, I really thought I would go to Africa or maybe somewhere like Paraguay, but no, Eastern Europe. And then when I finally got my invitation, I was going to Ukraine. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I didn't even know that was a Peace Corps country, so I probably should have done a little bit more research. So just, you guys have the time, look into the countries that we actually offer and kind of see what you're interested in. So I served as an English teacher there, which in the grand scheme of Peace Corps structure, it's a pretty structured program. So if you're a teacher, you actually have a concrete job, you have a contractual sort of obligation to be at school for a certain number of hours and teach a certain number of lessons, although I swear they would get moved around and canceled so much that I'm not sure I ever actually taught that solid 18 that I was supposed to. And so within Peace Corps, something that's really cool, so teaching English was my primary assignment, but I think everyone gets involved in secondary projects. So I was really interested in HIV/AIDS education, and I didn't even know this, but Ukraine actually has, I want to say, the fastest growing rate of infection outside of Africa. I did not know that going into it, and so I was really interested to kind of get involved with that and see what I could do to help out there. My school director was also interested in that, which I was kind of surprised about. Sometimes you'll run into, you really want to do a project, but you can't necessarily do that because your school or your organization isn't really gung-ho about it, so you have to take a lot of time to convince them that it's a great idea. I was very fortunate. My director was like very progressive and very interested in kind of using me as much as she could in any aspect, and so I was able to write a grant, and we funded an HIV/AIDS training center within my school, and so we did a lot of trainings throughout my community, and I found that to be very rewarding. So it was something, I loved teaching English, I loved having English clubs with my kids, but also getting involved in something totally different was really exciting. In terms of other projects, soccer, I'm a huge fan of soccer, and so I would just play with my students after school. A lot of my 7th grade boys were really into soccer, and they were totally shocked that a girl could kick the soccer ball around even better than they could sometimes. So that was something fun I did. So even just the little things that you can do during your service, those kind of human interactions are kind of what you remember the most once you finish your service, and kind of the things that maybe make the most impact even if you don't realize it at the time. And then kind of going off what other people have said in terms of Peace Corps and what you get out of it, the professional experiences that you're able to gain, people will assume you're a professional. Even though I started service when I was 22, sure I had some ESL tutoring experience, but I was by no means an expert on anything really. But people definitely expect that you are, and so it's really cool being in that position to kind of be the expert really quick and get involved in projects that you absolutely would not have the opportunity to get involved in the States. And so I was able to help write the English National Olympiad in Ukraine, which national Olympiads are a really big thing, I would say, probably from the Soviet Union, and so they're still pretty popular in Eastern Europe. So I was on a committee and we wrote the exam. We were able to help judge the exam, and that was a nationwide sort of test that is a really big deal. And that was kind of fun because kind of just writing an exam that was like completely correct English, and then kind of trying to make it challenging for the students, and then helping judge it and just kind of working with Ukrainian counterparts and just seeing how they kind of certain biases that they have when they come into a judging sort of center, and they're like, oh, I want this student to win because I like them more, they're from my region, or for various reasons, and then being that American and just saying, you know, why don't we try to be a little objective here? What about a little bit of fairness? And so that was really interesting. So kind of where Peace Corps has brought me now. So again, I had done that internship with the State Department, and it was something I was pretty interested in, but I definitely wanted a service experience before I really considered it. And so during my service, I was like, okay, I definitely want to go to graduate school. I chose public policy because Peace Corps kind of helped me focus in on my interests, and that was something I definitely became interested in during my service. So Ford School of Public Policy, I just kind of wanted to move close to home, which was shocking to me because that was definitely the opposite attitude I had when I joined Peace Corps. I was like, I want to get as far away as possible. And I came back being like, okay, it'd be nice to live about a half hour from my parents. So things changed, which is crazy. But so I chose the Ford School, and again, I definitely did want to pursue a career in the Foreign Service, and there are a few fellowship programs as undergraduates that you can take advantage of, and then also when you are applying to graduate school. So I applied to the Pickering Fellowship while I was in Peace Corps, and I was successful. I was, again, one of those emails where you're like absolutely shocked that you get when they said they wanted to interview me. So this last summer, I finished my Peace Corps service. I moved to Portland, Oregon, was just kind of bumming around doing some random secretary type jobs. And I got the email about Pickering. I flew to DC and interviewed, and then a couple days later I found out I was awarded this fellowship. And so what that means, I will be at the Ford School for 2 years, and then I'm obligated to work in the Foreign Service afterwards for 3 years, and then assuming things go well, I will be able to continue on that path. And so I'm kind of excited to see if it's something I want to do now, and I'm very committed to that sort of public service aspect of it. And then after the 3 years, we'll see if I'll stick with it or if I'll move on to other things. And so for me, Peace Corps was a way to kind of hone in on my own actual interests and gain a lot of skills. And I would say I definitely got the Pickering Fellowship mostly because of what I was able to talk about in terms of my Peace Corps service. And I'm kind of really excited to represent the U.S. abroad again, but kind of in a different capacity there. And so that's where I am now. So
Thanks, Katie. So that's a pretty diverse range of stories and experiences, all Peace Corps component, but by no means the entirety of the story. And so do you all have any questions? I've got some own prompts of my own, but we'd be happy to hear if you guys have any questions for our panelists. Anything about Peace Corps in general, more than welcome. Okay, well, one thing, sure,
Yeah.
go ahead.
None of you spoke about going with a married partner, but if you had any experience like working around anyone who went to Peace Corps with a married partner, I'm just kind of curious if you know anything about how that goes, how that works in the placement and everything.
I just as a recruiter here, I can help field that question. So I want to say it's 7% of volunteers who are abroad, 7% are married, and so it's absolutely something that you can do. The stipulation is just you have to be married for a year before you leave, and so yeah, just something to consider there. If you're serving as a married couple, it does sometimes take a little bit longer to find you a placement because we look at both of you individually and then what your skills are and what your interests are, and then of course we have to find a country and then a specific location that would be able to accommodate 2 volunteers, and maybe if you have different fields, so choosing a country that has both of those types of programs. In my group, we didn't have a married couple, but then groups come all the time, and so I met several couples who served, and I think it kind of like varies on how much they enjoyed it, but I think all the volunteers that I met, they really did enjoy their experience, and so it's a great support system that you'll have. So I know a lot of us, we were kind of alone, and you do feel a little bit of isolation, even if, say, you have another American in the same town as you, so you're kind of able to bounce ideas off each other and just be there for each other. So it's absolutely possible to serve as a married couple, and a lot of people do that.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of married couples out there in Peace Corps. There were a number in Malawi, and I think what they ultimately found is that it was very helpful in overcoming challenges that you face in Peace Corps because you have another American to turn to and talk things through with and reflect on the circumstances and everything else like that. So for couples, there is a unique application process where we have to interview each one of you independently and then both of you together, just to kind of understand all the motivations and experiences and everything else you would be interested in bringing to Peace Corps. But there's a lot going on there and a lot of benefits, I think, from having a successful service from that. Usually the first 2 to 3 months, which is the first training period, followed by 24 months of service. There's a possibility that you might be spatially separated during that time period, but otherwise you would have the opportunity to be together.
Cool. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, one thing I would be curious if you all could reflect on would be to talk about some of the big challenges that you face as Peace Corps volunteers, whether it was failed projects, which everyone fails all the time in Peace Corps, or language barriers, cultural barriers, strange idiosyncrasies with host families, anything like that, and talk about how they prepared you for facing challenges in your careers or coming back to the United States, whether it's grad school challenges or job challenges, you know, how you thought. I mean, perseverance, Hans's theme earlier was certainly a big reflection of that, but any other anecdotes on that end?
So, the biggest challenges that I faced in my service were not the ones that I expected. I think a lot of people going into service kind of think that like the physical conditions and the hardship is going to be the most difficult thing to adjust to, and it's really not. Like that's the thing that you get used to the most quickly. For me, it was the social and cultural adjustment and finding ways to work in a society where the pace of life is much different than it is in the United States. Finding ways to build relationships with people when your language skills are still a little bit shaky. Finding ways to sort of motivate people, knowing like how to interact with people in a culturally appropriate way. And also coming to terms with, you know, different social expectations of everybody. So in Senegal, I found that, you know, the concept of personal privacy is really not respected to the extent that it is in the United States. And ultimately, I found that to be a good thing and a really great learning experience. And really, that social and cultural adjustment that I gained and the skills that I gained in building relationships with people who did not share the same background as me, I'd say those were the most valuable skills I gained from overcoming those challenges, and finding ways to work and build teams and find common interests and collaborate with people who were different than I was.
I would say working with limited resources. And so you're often put in a place where, I mean, a teacher in America, of course, it's sometimes hard to get resources, and a lot of times you have to pay for things yourself, but just being in a place where just things that you're used to having are simply not there, and then learning what you can do to get the same outcome you wanted even without those resources. And so kind of here, I just feel like, yeah, it helps with like perseverance. So looking back on all the challenges that I faced in Peace Corps and all of the seminars I tried to host when we didn't have a space or there wasn't any chalk or couldn't find any markers, they're just like simple things like that. It's like, okay, I totally conquered something way more difficult. This is nothing. And so it gives you this perspective. It seems terribly challenging, even if you're kind of in a situation where things seem really tough at first. When you just look back at all those things you overcame during your Peace Corps service, everything kind of, you're like, okay, just kidding, this is not so bad. So I just think that perspective and that perseverance that you get from being a volunteer when you're kind of in a situation where something is limited and you don't have access to everything you need or that you want.
I'll just add on there, it's the same idea. It's the cultural and language adjustments that are probably the most challenging. I would have to say, though, to kind of, what was helpful to me was to look to the community as well for help with things. So something that I might be challenged by and go, oh, I don't know how to do this. My family and friends would just, oh yeah, that's all you have to do. And just reminding yourself that you don't have to know everything. You obviously don't know everything, even if you think you do. You don't have to know everything, but the people around you, they have so many creative solutions that this is kind of one of those goofy stories. But at the co-op I worked with, we had a rotary dial phone, if you've ever seen those. Okay, yeah, good old rotary phone. And there's a little phone abuse going on, too many phone calls going out and such. And so the leaders of the co-op, they put a lock on the phone, which I had never known that you could actually lock the phone. But they put this little lock on the phone. So only one person had the key to unlock the phone so you could make outgoing phone calls. It was actually the person who was abusing this who had the key. But that's besides the point. Nobody really knew that except for a few of us. But that's, another story. But we needed to make a phone call one day, and it was just so funny because that guy was out and nobody knew where he was at, and we needed to make this phone call. And after a little while of talking, one of the guys, nobody got in trouble for it. It was just such a creative solution, though, of like, it was a legitimate purpose. There was no abuse to it. It was just like, look to your neighbors, your family, your friends that you form and everything. And even when you think there might not be any out there, like they've got their ways, they've got the system down on how to make things work. So, being open to those cultural perspectives is really helpful.
I guess for me, I guess everyone knows that every family has struggles. There's always the odd uncle or there's something going on that no one else knows about. And when I went to Cameroon, I just fell in love with the country and with the culture in which I lived in that village. It was really hard, though, after when the third year came around. I really got into the culture a little bit deeper. They let me into pockets that I hadn't seen before with regards to some of their superstitions, and also learn more about some of the things that were going on with teachers and students. That was very distasteful, and that really kind of made me realize that there is no ideal community, and that was an epiphany to me, and I think it was part of what motivated me to continue in education, to just kind of try to be a positive force in kids' lives by loving them and investing in them, and trying to model good character. So that was tough.
Sure. How did you deal with, and how would you recommend dealing with being removed from the support network that you had implemented here in the U.S. when you went abroad?
I would say just the group that you work with, the volunteers in your group, become your new family, your new support network. And so in a way, it's kind of a transition. You have all your family and friends here, and you think you're going overseas, and you kind of think you're on your own, but the volunteers that are in your group that you serve with are an incredible support network to one another. Your sister group, however it's termed in the country that you serve, the group that's essentially the same sector and same project as you, that's been there for a year when you arrive, they're also an incredible support network to you because they've been through this experience for 1 year in the country, and so they can really help you with the adjustment process, with the questions that you have and everything. And then the staff with Peace Corps are also, another incredibly strong support network for volunteers. You have your program manager or associate Peace Corps director, depending on the country that you're serving and the titles they use. But that person is a great support, as well as country director, program training staff and everything, safety and security coordinators, medical doctors. Everybody is really interested in making sure that people find the support they need within the country, whatever that happens to be. And you still have your support network at home because you're still, especially these days, volunteers have cell phones, you have email access. It's very different than when I served. And even if you don't have it in your community, because even just like in the U.S., you don't always have a cell phone signal, you don't always have Wi-Fi or internet access wherever you are, but you'll have access to it on a generally regular basis, whether it's a weekly or a monthly basis, and in many cases daily. And so you still have those connections that you have at home. But I would encourage you to really build the connections in country, because that's so much more important and so much more helpful to you than depending on people back home. Because if you're going through a tough time, and you will feel the ups and downs and everything, but relying on the volunteer network and the staff network, but also the host family and the local connections that you build, that's what's going to really help you adapt and gain experience and a level of acceptance in the community. You guys have other suggestions? Yeah.
I would agree that your in-country Peace Corps volunteer friends are the ones that are really great support. We ended up getting together in Bamenda, every month. We'd come in there and get our paycheck and go out to dinner and stuff and have some fun. And just first question was always, how's your digestive system doing?
Yeah.
3 years of diarrhea, get ready for it.
Yeah.
Another great professional skill, you become very comfortable talking about your GI.
That's
right.
Yeah. So, yeah. Got to temper that when you get back to it.
That's true.
Yeah, you do.
Don't bring that up in a job interview. But in a professional panel, it's okay.
And don't eat chicken bones when you go to a person's house. I would eat the whole bone. So little things you learn. But yeah, your friends there were tremendous support. It just cannot be underemphasized how important that was, because they are coming from 20 years of seeing life through the lens of being an American, just like you, and so to kick ideas around with them and to deal with struggles is tough. And the third year was tough for me because all my friends had left, except for a couple that had been awarded extensions. So.
Yeah, I think they're absolutely the people to turn to. As a Peace Corps volunteer, you're not likely to have another Peace Corps volunteer in your village. So there are circumstances where you do, but otherwise, you've got these people close by. They're really your only assets. I know for me, I had a volunteer about an hour to the east of me and an hour to the west of me, and they're two of the best friends I've ever made. We developed projects together. We completely screwed up projects together. We screwed up language use. We made bucket wine together out of mangoes. We did all sorts of crazy stuff. But the great part of all of that is you have this great support network, but you also have your own community, and your community is going to support you as well. And when you really put yourself into that community, they give back, and you become their Peace Corps volunteer, and they would make sure they're taking care of you. But then you've also got these Americans to go and reflect on and turn to when the going gets tough, and people start locking phones and stealing cement or anything else like that. Those are frustrating, and so you need people to turn to close by who understand what you're dealing with and everything. So
I would also recommend, so it varies across Peace Corps countries. I lived with a host family for my full 2 years, and some countries work that way, some countries you live on your own. Either way, I would highly recommend sort of finding a host family in your community that you view as your family when you're there. It's very helpful to have a support network with volunteers, and I was very lucky to have a pretty, there were quite a few volunteers clustered in my region. But the relationship I was able to build with my host family was probably the most rewarding one. And when you get to that point where you can share your feelings and share your emotions with your host family and have somebody relate to you in that way, that's probably one of the most valuable things you can take away from your service.
Any other questions, comments, or anything else? Well, I guess one thing I'd be interested in hearing from you all is, so we're all a collection of U of M students, and if you were in the position today of an undergraduate at U of M, what would you want to know? What are the skills you need to do, or what would you have done as an undergrad to kind of prepare yourself for Peace Corps and the road beyond?
So at first so I went to an all-white high school. There was one African American there, and then Vanderbilt is very old Southern white, at least it was back in the 80s, and there was a big question as to whether I could live as a minority, and so and I guess in retrospect I would have done something to prove that I could, and I had to actually to get into the Peace Corps. I was able to land a job in a lab at Meharry Medical College, which is a traditionally African American medical college in Nashville, and was able to land that job. Told them, hey, I got this job. I'm starting next week. They said, great, you're accepted. And so I didn't go do the job at all, because I was waiting tables and happy with the money I was making there. So kind of went in there unprimed for that, but it would have been nice to have had experience living more as a minority if I could put myself in that type of situation.
I would say it would have been nice to have more of a diverse range of volunteer type experiences, and so I kind of pegged myself as an English teacher coming from international affairs, and I just didn't feel like I was qualified for certain Peace Corps jobs. So I very much enjoyed kind of ESL tutoring, and I very much enjoyed being a teaching English as a foreign language volunteer, but I wish that I would have maybe explored other things, because it turns out I was really also interested in HIV/AIDS education, and I was able to get involved with that as a Peace Corps volunteer and as an education volunteer, but it would have been nice to kind of have more of a wide range of experiences before going in. And so if you have time before you graduate, and not even just to make yourself competitive for Peace Corps, but just to get an idea of what you want to do after graduation, there are just so many ways that you can get involved in kind of doing a lot of different things. So it'll kind of give you a perspective of what you really want to do. So I wish I would have done that.
I'd say learn another language well. And it doesn't even have to be the language that you end up using in your Peace Corps service. In fact, a lot of times it won't be. But by doing that, you really learn how you most effectively learn a language. And then when you do go to your host country, you have a better sense of how can I learn this new language that I'm presented with in the most effective way, in the fastest way. It really sets your mind up to do that again in the future.
In addition to that, I agree with all of those points. Talk to people who have served overseas. Aside from being part of this panel here and everything, talk with people, whether you know them through family and friend connections, or you want to talk to one of us, or Brian can set you up with somebody or whatever. Get out there and ask people about their service and the challenges, because it's going to be different when you can ask your one-on-one questions and everything, and you can talk with somebody. But I think that's really helpful, because when I went through that, I kind of went through a year process of trying to figure out what to do with my life. My New Year's resolution thing, and it was just so helpful. I read a ton of books about Peace Corps, but I realized, this is in the 90s, I realized the books I was reading were written in, about volunteers who served in the 60s and 70s. And, and I had this picture that I wasn't really liking. I was like, it sounds kind of cool, but it sounds kind of weird too. And then I went, well, this isn't really very fair of me. I'm not looking at people who are serving now or in recent years. And that was a great thing for me to do. It's just, I connected with the recruiting office and just I basically went to interview them before I applied, because I'm like, I need to know if this is something I'm interested in, and I'm not going to waste my time or your time with an application if it's not the right thing for me. And that was one of the best things I did, was just to go get more information and talk with them, and to talk with other people I knew who had served in Peace Corps or done other things, and just really think through, is this something that feels right for me? And it was like, once I hit that point where I'm like, yeah, this is the right step to take, like I said, everything just clicked. And that's when you know you've made the good decision.
Well, that is a great note to end our panel on, and it would be to highlight the resources that we do have. So for those of you who aren't aware, the vision for Peace Corps was actually defined by John F. Kennedy on the steps of the Michigan Union. So U of M has quite an extensive history with Peace Corps, but also quite a lot of returned Peace Corps volunteers on campus. We have 9 partner programs between U of M grad school programs and Peace Corps itself that combine fellows like Hans was in, or Masters International. I actually am in that program as well. And so there's a lot of different opportunities to take advantage of, but also a lot of people to talk to and learn more about Peace Corps. There's a great Southeastern Michigan Returned Peace Corps volunteer organization that you can take advantage of. They actually run a mentoring program where they set you up with a returned Peace Corps volunteer and just kind of have candid conversations about what Peace Corps service is like. Is it right for you? How do you talk to mom and dad about you wanting to go away to Africa for 2 years? All sorts of stuff like that. It's all open and it's all fair game. And we're happy to talk as well. So we've got an office right across the hallway. Come see us. We have office hours every day and make any use of that. And I guess to close, we'll stick around if you have any questions about Peace Corps or anything else. But I'd like to thank our panelists for coming and thank you all for coming as well. Yep.